In the quiet town of Bloomington, a mystery lingered for years, the disappearance of Emily Carter. Her absence left a void, a question mark that haunted the community. But what if the answers were hidden in plain sight? What if the key to unlocking the truth lay buried, waiting to be discovered? Join us as we delve into the chilling tale of Emily's fate, a story of secrets, revelations, and the relentless pursuit of justice. A vanishing in the shadows. The night of September 18, 2003, began like many others in Bloomington, Illinois. The air carried the coolness of early fall, with the trees around Lake Evergreen whispering under a restless wind. For Emily Carter, a 21-year-old student at Illinois State University, it should have been nothing more than a long shift ending at the roadside diner where she worked. She clocked out at 11:15 p.m., waved goodnight to her coworkers, and slid behind the wheel of her light blue Honda Civic. No one realized it would be the last time she was seen alive. Traffic was sparse that Thursday night. Most residents were already home, their lights dimmed, but Emily's headlights cut through the darkness as she steered onto the highway. She had a 30-minute drive ahead, a route she had taken countless times before. Yet within that familiar stretch of road, something unusual unfolded. Records later revealed that at 11:47 p.m., her phone attempted a call to her mother. The call lasted just 2 seconds. No voice was heard, no words exchanged, only silence and then disconnection. It was the kind of detail that would haunt investigators for years. At dawn the following morning, commuters spotted Emily's Honda abandoned on a gravel road branching off from the interstate. The car sat crooked, headlights still glowing, windshield streaked with dew. Its doors were locked, and the keys were missing. On the ground nearby, officers recovered a single gold earring, later confirmed to belong to Emily. The positioning of the driver's seat raised eyebrows. It had been pushed far back, a configuration impossible for her petite frame. Something was wrong. The Carter family's panic grew unbearable when Emily failed to return home. Her father, Thomas, drove frantically around the city, retracing possible routes, while her mother clutched the silent phone, willing it to ring again. When police arrived at the scene, they immediately noticed the absence of footprints around the car, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Tire tracks from another vehicle etched deep into the gravel suggested a second car had been present. Detectives began canvassing the surrounding area. They spoke to a truck driver who recalled seeing a small blue sedan pulled to the side of the road late that night. He described another vehicle, a dark pickup truck, idling close behind it with its lights off. The detail was chilling, hinting that Emily had not been alone in her final moments on that road. The investigation stretched into the nearby woods, where search dogs picked up a faint trail before losing the scent near the shoreline of Lake Evergreen. The still water mirrored the searchlights of helicopters, each beam scouring the depths as divers prepared to plunge in. For hours, teams swept the lakebed, bringing up branches, tires, and debris, but no trace of Emily. The absence of evidence deepened the mystery rather than clarifying it. Local newspapers ran front-page stories by the next day. Emily's photograph, a smiling young woman with auburn hair tucked behind her ears, stared back from newsstands across McLean County. Vigils sprouted almost overnight, neighbors gathering with candles to keep hope alive. Yet for all the prayers and unity, an undercurrent of dread pulsed through the community. Parents warned their daughters not to drive alone at night. Rumors multiplied, some suggesting Emily had run away, others whispering about a predator stalking college women. The Carter family endured a different kind of nightmare. Emily's room remained untouched, her textbooks stacked neatly on the desk, her half-finished coffee mug left on the dresser. Every detail screamed of a life interrupted. Her younger brother remembered the last conversation they had, a brief exchange about borrowing her jacket. To him, it became an unbearable memory, ordinary words carrying extraordinary weight when replayed in hindsight. Law enforcement worked tirelessly, but with nobody and no immediate suspect, their leads were thin. The unanswered phone call, the mysterious truck, and the abandoned vehicle formed fragments of a puzzle that refused to fit together. Investigators wondered whether Emily had been lured, forced, or ambushed. Theories clashed, but none brought them closer to answers. The chilling silence of that night lingered for years, preserved in reports and in the memories of those who knew her. Every passing day without resolution hardened the mystery into something almost mythic. Emily Carter was no longer just a missing person. She became the haunting question mark of Bloomington. And yet, as with all shadows, there was more hiding behind the darkness than anyone expected. Could the small town endure the fear of realizing the danger might not be far from home? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. A community on edge. The disappearance of Emily Carter rippled through Bloomington with an intensity no one anticipated. By the morning after her car was found, the community had shifted from sleepy routine to restless panic. In diners, grocery stores, and classrooms, the only conversation was Emily. Strangers shared theories over coffee, parents held their children closer, and whispers about what might have happened spread faster than the official updates released by police. The town square became a makeshift command center. Volunteers poured in with flashlights, raincoats, and a determination to find the missing student. Local churches opened their doors, serving hot meals to searchers who combed fields and forest edges late into the night. Flyers with Emily's photograph, her auburn hair gleaming under sunlight, her smile wide, covered telephone poles, library windows, and the notice boards of small businesses. It was impossible to walk through Bloomington without her image staring back, demanding answers. In classrooms at Illinois State University, professors paused their lectures to acknowledge Emily's absence. Friends recalled her quiet kindness, how she never left a study group without offering rides home. For them, the idea that someone so dependable could vanish without explanation was unthinkable. Her professors and classmates joined searches, trudging through muddy fields, hoping to stumble upon some clue. Detectives turned to technology to narrow their hunt. Cellular towers were examined, revealing the brief final signal of Emily's phone pinging near Lake Evergreen before going silent forever. The trail ended at the water's edge, but no dive team could locate her. Rumors grew out of this silence, with theories ranging from a boating accident to a predator hiding in the woods. None explained why her locked car was found abandoned on dry land. Tension magnified when residents began reporting sightings of suspicious vehicles. Several claimed to have seen a dark pickup truck cruising rural roads in the days before Emily's disappearance. One farmer described headlights lingering near his property at midnight, a truck idling with the engine running before vanishing down a dirt path. Another witness said the same kind of vehicle followed her briefly on the highway before turning away. These accounts struck nerves, feeding a growing belief that someone had been hunting. Law enforcement tried to reassure the town, but every unanswered question seemed to deepen mistrust. Some residents accused the police of moving too slowly. Others criticized their decision to focus heavily on Emily's ex-boyfriend in the first days, insisting that by chasing a single lead, investigators might have let the real culprit slip further away. Public meetings with detectives became heated, parents standing up to demand stronger patrols, curfews, and protection for their daughters. Shops began closing earlier. Gas stations kept lights blazing all night. The quiet routines of Bloomington gave way to precautions that spoke volumes. Windows locked, doors double-bolted, and security cameras purchased in record numbers. Even local events that usually united the community, Friday night football games, craft fairs, and neighborhood cookouts, saw dwindling crowds. The absence of laughter and the weight of unease hung heavily over the town. For Emily's family, the communal support was both comforting and agonizing. Neighbors brought food, offered prayers, and sat with them through sleepless nights. Yet each kind gesture was a reminder that Emily remained missing, her face plastered everywhere as if the posters themselves were screaming for her to return. Her mother described opening her mailbox each day with dread, afraid of receiving news too painful to bear, yet equally fearful of hearing nothing at all. The case began drawing statewide attention. News crews descended on Bloomington, their cameras capturing candlelit vigils and interviewing tearful residents. The story spread across Illinois, turning Emily's name into a symbol of both fear and fragile hope. With every broadcast, the pressure on law enforcement escalated. They increased patrols near Lake Evergreen, stationed officers on campus, and urged residents to report even the smallest suspicion. Still, the central question remained untouched. Where was Emily Carter? An unnerving trend soon emerged. The hotline was overwhelmed with false tips. many from opportunists chasing attention or the promise of reward money. Some callers swore she had been sighted in nearby towns, while others insisted she was alive in Chicago. Each misleading lead drained valuable resources and morale, steering investigators off course. Sorting truth from fabrication became an exhausting task, and the community's frustration deepened as progress stalled. The most frightening shift came not from rumor, but from behavior. Parents of young women imposed strict curfews. Students stopped walking across campus alone. Taxi services saw a spike in calls from customers unwilling to drive late at night. Bloomington had changed. A city once defined by its college town charm and small business warmth now lived under the shadow of suspicion. The reality struck hardest when officials admitted to the press that they believed Emily's disappearance was suspicious and potentially criminal. No longer could residents hope she had merely run away or gotten lost. A darker possibility was now official. The acknowledgement tore through the town like a storm. Fear no longer hid in whispers, it was spoken openly, carved into every conversation, etched into the faces of neighbors who no longer fully trusted one another. In that fragile moment, one question loomed larger than all others. If Emily was taken against her will, then who among them had the capacity to do it? What if the truth wasn't buried among outsiders at all, but tied to someone the community had long trusted? Step with us into the hidden corners of the story. The first suspect. The investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance reached its first turning point within days. Detectives zeroed in on Daniel Reeves, her ex-boyfriend. On paper, he was the obvious choice. Their relationship had ended only 3 months earlier, and it had not been a quiet breakup. Friends remembered their arguments spilling into public spaces, heated exchanges over jealousy and suspicion. Emily, ever polite, had confided to one roommate that Daniel struggled to let go, showing up at her workplace and leaving notes on her windshield long after their separation. When detectives arrived at his modest 2-bedroom apartment on the west side of Bloomington, Reeves appeared nervous. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room washed his pale face as he fidgeted with the zipper of his sweatshirt. Investigators pressed him on his whereabouts the night Emily vanished. His answer was simple. He had stayed home, watching television, then gone to bed. But the details lacked conviction. When asked what he had been watching, he stumbled, naming 2 shows that aired hours apart. What unnerved detectives further was his admission that he had attempted to call Emily that night. Phone records confirmed he dialed her number at 11:30 p.m., just minutes before her car was abandoned. He insisted she never answered, but the timing raised suspicion. Did his call connect with the mysterious 2-second attempt to her mother? The possibility seemed too sharp to ignore. In neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone, the news traveled quickly. Local papers ran bold headlines, "Ex-boyfriend questioned in Carter disappearance." Suddenly, Reeves's face was everywhere, printed beside Emily's, the words "prime suspect" lingering even before charges existed. Friends distanced themselves overnight. His workplace quietly suspended him, and his family endured whispers in grocery aisles. In the eyes of many, he was already guilty. Interrogators seized on the community's suspicions as leverage. They cited neighbors' accounts of heated arguments between Daniel and Emily that summer. One remembered Emily shouting, "Just leave me alone," on a stifling July evening, while another claimed to have seen him circling her block late at night. Reeves denied it all, but his trembling hands, cracking voice, and repeated requests for water painted a picture of unease that only fueled doubts about his innocence. At one point, investigators introduced photographs of Emily's abandoned car, sliding them across the table. Reeves glanced at them, eyes lingering on the misplaced driver's seat and the earring in the dirt. His expression was difficult to read. Was it a shock or recognition? The detectives noted his silence carefully, interpreting it as reluctance to speak. Meanwhile, Emily's family sat at home following every development through television updates. Her father, Thomas Carter, admitted later that he wanted to believe Reeves was responsible, not out of malice, but because the thought that a stranger had taken Emily was even more terrifying. If it was him, he explained in a later interview, at least it meant the danger wasn't random. But if it was someone else, it meant anyone could do it again. Public pressure mounted with each passing day. Protesters gathered outside the police station holding signs demanding justice for Emily. Some shouted Daniel's name, calling him a monster. His own mother, escorted out of a grocery store by security after angry confrontations, begged the town not to condemn her son without proof. Yet in a community desperate for resolution, patience was scarce. The investigation dug deeper. Detectives pulled his financial records, scrutinized his work schedule, and searched his apartment. They found nothing conclusive, no trace of Emily, no signs of struggle, no incriminating evidence. Still, they pressed harder. His phone records showed he was awake late that night, his attempts to contact Emily clear. To investigators, it suggested obsession, even desperation. One officer described Reeves's 12-hour interrogation as a psychological storm. "We thought he would break," the detective later recalled. "Every sign pointed to him. He had motive, opportunity, and history. All we needed was a confession, but the confession never came." Reeves stuck to his story. He had been home, he had called Emily, and that was the extent of it. The atmosphere in Bloomington grew poisonous. Strangers vandalized his car with the word "killer" etched into the paint. Former friends stopped answering his calls. His new girlfriend, caught in the storm, received anonymous letters warning her to leave him. Reeves himself seemed to shrink under the weight of suspicion, his once confident posture replaced by slumped shoulders and downcast eyes whenever he appeared in public. Even as detectives built their case around him, a seed of doubt remained. There were inconsistencies they could not resolve. A neighbor placed him at home earlier in the evening, sitting on his porch, smoking a cigarette. Another claimed his apartment lights were still on near midnight. If he truly abducted Emily, when had he done it? The timeline strained against certainty. And then came the discovery that would tilt the scales completely. Buried in hours of footage from a gas station in Normal, Illinois, investigators found Reeves's face caught clearly on camera, buying cigarettes at nearly the exact moment Emily's car was found abandoned. The revelation would break the case wide open, but at this stage, neither Reeves nor the community knew what storm was about to hit. What happens when a single overlooked recording tears suspicion away from the obvious suspect and exposes how fragile the truth really is? Let us guide you into what no one expected. The alibi that changed everything. The search for clarity shifted in an unexpected direction when Bloomington detectives, exhausted from chasing unproductive leads, began re-examining minor pieces of evidence. A junior officer assigned to review video archives from businesses near the highway stumbled across something remarkable: a grainy surveillance recording from a gas station in Normal, a town just 15 minutes north. The timestamp read 11:50 p.m., the very night Emily Carter vanished. On the tape, a young man in a hooded sweatshirt approached the counter. He bought cigarettes, handed over cash, and lingered briefly before leaving. When investigators froze the frame, the image became unmistakable. Daniel Reeves, the prime suspect, captured clearly on camera at a moment investigators believed he was near Emily's abandoned car. The revelation rattled the investigative team. For nearly 2 weeks, Reeves had been painted as the villain in the community's imagination, scrutinized and condemned. Now, in the flicker of a gas station camera, his alibi had transformed from shaky to ironclad. He could not have been in 2 places at once. The tight narrative built against him collapsed overnight. When detectives confronted him with the discovery, Reeves's reaction was subdued. Rather than triumphant, he appeared weary, almost hollow. "I told you I didn't do it," he murmured, voice carrying no satisfaction. The exhaustion of being vilified had left him broken, his reputation shredded even before he was cleared. His relief came too late to undo the damage inflicted on his life. In newsrooms across Illinois, editors scrambled to rewrite headlines. Stories once stamped with "ex-boyfriend suspected" quickly pivoted to "alibi clears Reeves." But the damage in the court of public opinion was irreversible. At his workplace, managers decided against reinstating him, fearing backlash. Neighbors still whispered. Children on his street pointed at his house with wide eyes. A shadow of guilt lingered even after the facts shifted. For Emily's parents, the news sparked conflicting emotions. On one hand, they no longer had to wrestle with the belief that someone once close to their daughter might be responsible. On the other hand, Reeves's release meant the trail toward truth grew colder. The person who had taken Emily was still free, and the clock was ticking further away from the night she disappeared. Within the department, the moment forced painful reflection. Senior officers admitted that early desperation had narrowed their perspective. By focusing so intently on Reeves, other leads had been neglected. Tire tracks near the gravel road remained unexplored. Reports of a dark pickup truck were left unpursued. Even the work glove found in the brush, tagged and dismissed as irrelevant, sat untouched in evidence storage. The realization left detectives frustrated and determined to reassess every angle. Forensic teams revisited the Civic once more, cataloging overlooked traces. This time they noted faint streaks along the driver's door suggesting it had been wiped clean. Whoever abandoned the car had taken steps to erase themselves. The earring in the dirt no longer seemed like an accident. It may have been dropped deliberately, a signal or perhaps a trophy. These nuances demanded deeper analysis, now that Reeves was officially eliminated from suspicion. The shift in focus reignited tension in the community. If the obvious suspect was innocent, then the implication grew more sinister. Someone else was out there, someone who had managed to vanish back into the fabric of the town without detection. Parents redoubled restrictions on their children. Students formed carpools rather than walking home. The idea that a stranger might be responsible took root, amplifying the sense of vulnerability. National attention returned to Bloomington in a frenzy. Major networks aired segments about wrongful suspicion and investigative missteps. Commentators debated whether police bias had blinded the search for truth. Reeves himself declined most interview requests, unwilling to relive the ordeal. His silence only added to the mystery, as outsiders speculated about the missing puzzle pieces still buried in the case. Detective Laura McKenna, one of the younger officers on the team, summarized the mood best in her notes. "We chased a shadow because it was easier than confronting the unknown. But the unknown hasn't left us. It's standing in the same dark space, waiting." Her words reflected the grim understanding that the investigation had to be rebuilt from the ground up. For Bloomington, the clearing of Reeves was both a relief and a new source of terror. If not him, then who? What kind of person could intercept a young woman on a well-traveled road, leave no immediate trace, and fade without a sound? The mystery no longer felt like an isolated tragedy. It felt like a threat embedded within the community itself. The weight of uncertainty pressed heavier than before, and investigators braced themselves for the next development, because the story was far from finished. When suspicion falls apart, where does the trail point next? Stay here as the next twist unfolds. Silence in the files. By 2005, the case of Emily Carter had slipped into a haunting stillness. The search parties had ended, vigils had grown smaller, and television crews no longer camped outside the Bloomington police station. Inside the department, her file sat stacked among dozens of others, a thick binder filled with photographs, transcripts, and evidence logs. It was still pulled from the shelf often enough to satisfy the family that detectives were working on it, but in truth, momentum had drained away. Among the items cataloged was a mud-stained glove recovered 30 feet from Emily's abandoned Civic. At the time, the glove had been dismissed as irrelevant. Investigators assumed it belonged to a passing construction worker or a farmer, one of the many who frequented the rural roads near Lake Evergreen. Technology in 2003 offered little to test it beyond basic fiber comparison, and with no immediate match, it had simply been bagged and filed. Years later, as Illinois established new cold case initiatives, evidence from Emily's disappearance came under fresh scrutiny. Advances in DNA analysis allowed samples too faint for earlier testing to now yield results. Forensic technicians cut a sliver of fabric from inside the glove, swabbing the inner lining for skin cells. Days later, the lab produced an answer, a partial genetic profile. The name linked to that partial match was Mark Turner, a man with a minor criminal record. He had once been charged with aggravated assault during a bar fight but had avoided prison time. His name had never surfaced in the original investigation, not once in any interview or community tip. Yet his DNA had lingered quietly in the database, waiting for technology to catch up. What troubled detectives most was Turner's proximity. In 2003, he had lived less than 2 miles from the gravel road where Emily's car had been discovered. Employment records showed he worked construction jobs around Lake Evergreen, including a drainage project, during the very month of her disappearance. His presence at the site was never questioned, never verified, because at the time no one thought to ask. Cold case detectives began piecing together fragments of his history. Turner had left Bloomington abruptly in 2004, relocating to Indiana under circumstances described by neighbors as sudden. Some said he packed overnight and never explained why. Others recalled him as quiet but odd. A man who stared too long at passing women and kept to himself in a small rented house. The more investigators learned, the more the glove seemed less like discarded litter and more like a breadcrumb left behind. The Carter family had not been told of the glove during the original investigation. When detectives finally informed them years later, the revelation left Emily's father stunned. "You mean all this time there was something?" he asked, his voice caught between anger and disbelief. For him, the knowledge that evidence existed but was left untouched added salt to the wound of grief. It became clear that their trust in the process had been misplaced. Within the department, a quiet frustration brewed. Younger detectives, new to the case, openly questioned how so many details had been disregarded. Was it tunnel vision around the ex-boyfriend? Was it exhaustion from public pressure? Or was it the simple reality that small-town departments lacked the tools and manpower to follow every thread? Whatever the reason, silence in the files had bought the true perpetrator nearly 2 decades of freedom. Forensic experts pressed further. Trace materials on the glove suggested exposure to motor oil, consistent with someone working in mechanical trades. Turner's employment history included stints in auto repair as well as construction, making the connection even sharper. A fragment of reddish paint found on the glove didn't match Emily's Honda but hinted at another vehicle entirely, one investigators had never identified. This discovery shifted the tone of the case. It no longer centered on a broken relationship or the possibility of a chance encounter. It now pointed towards someone with methodical opportunity, someone whose occupation allowed him to blend in unnoticed along the very roads where Emily disappeared. Community reaction was slow to catch up, since details about Turner's connection were not yet public. But inside the walls of the Bloomington station, whispers grew louder. If this man had been overlooked once, what else had slipped past? If a single glove carried his trace, what might other forgotten items reveal under new light? As the case file thickened with new notes, a haunting truth emerged. Silence is rarely emptiness. Sometimes, silence hides the one voice that was there all along. When evidence buried for years begins to speak, what other shadows in the record might answer back? Come with us as the secrets grow even darker. A breakthrough call. In the spring of 2020, a tip line at the McLean County Sheriff's Department rang late at night. The operator answered to a woman's voice, muffled and deliberate, as though filtered through fabric. She refused to give her name, but her words came quick, sharp, and chilling. "You're looking in the wrong places," she said. He came home that night covered in mud, shaking, muttering about how she wouldn't stop screaming. The caller hung up before questions could be asked, leaving detectives frozen in their seats. Every detail of the conversation was documented word for word, and when the transcript was laid out the next morning, the investigative team realized the magnitude of what they had just received. For years, the case had languished in silence. Now, out of nowhere, came a sliver of memory that linked directly to someone new. Detectives began cross-referencing names from the past with anyone tied to both construction and the lake. One name surfaced immediately: Mark Turner. His employment records placed him in the area during the exact week Emily vanished, and now the anonymous voice hinted at his involvement in language too specific to be brushed off as rumor. Investigators tried to trace the call. It originated from a payphone on the outskirts of Decatur, nearly an hour away from Bloomington. Security cameras in the area had long since been removed, and the payphone itself stood under a flickering streetlight outside a closed laundromat. No one could place who had used it, and no fingerprints remained on its greasy surface. The caller had managed to leave nothing behind but her words. The detectives debated whether the call was genuine or a cruel hoax. Yet the detail of Turner returning, covered in mud, resonated. Records showed heavy rain had fallen on the night Emily disappeared, turning back roads into slick quagmires. It wasn't the kind of embellishment an outsider would casually invent. To build context, investigators began interviewing women who had known Turner in the early 2000s. Several described him as brooding, prone to unpredictable tempers. One former roommate recalled finding him sitting motionless at the kitchen table in the middle of the night, staring at his hands. Another woman, who briefly dated him, claimed he often avoided eye contact, but when angered, his stare became so intense she once left the room shaking. None of these accounts provided direct evidence, but together they painted a portrait of a man capable of unnerving behavior. Detectives dug deeper into his background. Turner's adolescence had been marked by instability, frequent moves between relatives, a string of expulsions from schools, and a juvenile record sealed by the courts. As an adult, he drifted from job to job, sometimes working construction, sometimes in auto shops, rarely staying anywhere long enough to build roots. His departures were often sudden, coinciding with disputes or unexplained incidents. By the time he vanished from Bloomington in 2004, he had left behind little but a trail of vague impressions. The anonymous call transformed these fragments into something more coherent. What had once seemed like a drifter's life now hinted at someone running from a past he didn't want uncovered. Detectives began contacting his old employers, tracing time cards and payroll slips. A pattern emerged. Turner had stopped showing up for work within days of Emily's disappearance. When asked why, his foreman at the drainage site recalled only a terse message. He said he needed to leave town, the foreman remembered. No explanation, just that. Meanwhile, the Carter family was informed of the development. Emily's mother described the moment she heard about the call as a mix of dread and hope. "For years, no one said anything," she whispered. "Now suddenly someone remembers him coming home like that?" It felt like we were standing on the edge of something, but still too far away to see it. Investigators chased down every potential connection to the mysterious woman. Was she someone who had lived with Turner? An old flame? A neighbor who had heard too much? Each lead unraveled into uncertainty. Whoever she was, she had chosen secrecy over exposure, and her silence after that night remained unbroken. The unanswered questions left investigators restless. Yet the fact remained. Her words had reignited the case, sharpening focus on Turner and setting in motion a chain of inquiries that would soon close in on him. When a nameless voice stirs old shadows, how long before the shadows themselves step into the light? Walk with us into the truth that was never meant to surface. The return of a suspect. In the autumn of 2021, nearly 18 years after Emily Carter vanished, the name Mark Turner resurfaced in the most unexpected way. He had not been mentioned in news reports since his quiet departure from Bloomington in 2004. For most, he had slipped into the dust of memory, a man barely recalled. Yet his reappearance came not through voluntary return, but through a moment of recklessness that spiraled into revelation. Late one evening in Peoria, a bar fight erupted between strangers. Police were called after chairs toppled, bottles shattered, and fists flew. Among those arrested was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a scar etched across his temple. His name, entered into the system, was not immediately familiar. But when his fingerprints were scanned, alarms triggered. A cold case flag surfaced, tying him to DNA evidence retrieved from Bloomington. Detectives who had nearly retired from Emily's investigation felt their phones buzz with the alert. Turner was back in Illinois, no longer a fleeting name in a case file, but a man in custody. The shock of the moment rippled through the department. For years, theories had floated without anchor. Now, suddenly, the figure at the center of whispers stood behind bars. In court the following week, Turner appeared older but no less unsettling. He sat hunched in an orange jumpsuit, his gaze sliding across the room without resting on anyone. Observers noted the way he tapped his fingers against the wooden bench, as though agitated by rhythms no one else could hear. Reporters, sensing the weight of history, filled the gallery. For the Carter family, seated only feet away, it was the first time they had laid eyes on the man connected to their daughter's disappearance. The arrest alone did not confirm guilt, but detectives immediately sought to connect his recent life to the missing years. Records revealed he had moved between Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio, taking jobs under aliases. At times, he used false social security numbers, drifting through construction companies and garages. His nomadic existence made him hard to trace, almost as if he had designed his life to remain invisible. Investigators interviewed those who had encountered him in recent years. A landlord in Fort Wayne recalled Turner renting a room for 3 months before vanishing without paying rent. A co-worker in Cincinnati remembered his strange habit of walking off job sites mid-shift, returning hours later without explanation. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, a man who never invited conversation beyond a curt nod. Each story added to the unsettling portrait, a man unwilling to stay still, unwilling to leave a trace. The Carter family, meanwhile, faced a flood of emotions. For years, their pain had lived in limbo, with no one to hold accountable. Now, seeing Turner alive and brought back into the frame, anger surged alongside grief. Emily's brother described the sight of him in shackles as both a relief and a torment. "You want to scream that he knows something," he said later. "But then you realize knowing won't bring her back." Bloomington itself reacted with shock. The town, which had moved on publicly but still carried private scars, now faced the return of a name that had hovered at the edges of suspicion. Old rumors resurfaced in coffee shops, neighbors exchanging glances as they remembered the quiet construction worker who once lived nearby. Younger residents who had only heard fragments of Emily's story were drawn to the case anew, scouring online archives and piecing together the tragedy that had shaped their parents' generation. Detectives wasted no time reopening the investigation with renewed intensity. They obtained warrants to search Turner's storage units in Indiana. Inside one, buried beneath tarps and toolboxes, they discovered a duffel bag filled with personal items, old work gloves, worn photographs, and newspaper clippings about disappearances in other towns. None mentioned Emily directly, but the presence of such articles raised suspicion. Why would a man with no family ties keep faded stories about missing women? The legal process creaked forward slowly. Turner's defense team argued that a partial DNA profile was not enough to prove involvement. They framed him as a drifter with a troubled past, unfairly targeted to satisfy public hunger for closure. Prosecutors countered with the glove, the timeline, and now his pattern of vanishing from towns under suspicious circumstances. For the investigators who had carried Emily's file for years, the moment felt surreal. The suspect they had once overlooked now sat in their custody. The unanswered question was whether he would break his silence or drag the town deeper into a maze of uncertainty. And so, Bloomington found itself holding its breath once again. After 18 years of shadows, the suspect had returned. But what he carried back with him was still a mystery too dark to name. When a man tied to the past resurfaces, will he reveal the truth or bury it even deeper? Stay close as the layers continue to peel back. The confession that wasn't. Mark Turner's arrest in Peoria had electrified Bloomington, but the next step, the interrogation, would prove even more unnerving. When detectives brought him into the small gray room inside the McLean County Jail, they expected some version of release. They anticipated anger, denial, or even a hasty admission. What they received instead was something stranger, silence laced with riddles. Turner sat motionless at first, hands cuffed, eyes scanning the walls as if searching for cracks. He answered the earliest questions with short, clipped phrases. Yes. No. Don't remember. Detectives shifted tactics, sliding photographs of Emily across the table. For a moment he studied the images, his lips parting slightly as if he might say something. Then he pushed the photos back and muttered, "You'll never find her. Not where you think." The line froze the room. It was not an admission, but it wasn't denial either. It felt rehearsed, almost as though he wanted those words to linger long after the conversation ended. Detectives pressed him to clarify. What did he mean? Did he know where she was? But Turner leaned back in his chair, tilting his head toward the ceiling as though the very act of responding was beneath him. Psychologists brought in by the prosecution later described his manner as classic evasion, an attempt to maintain control by feeding fragments of information without giving anything usable. One consultant compared it to dangling a key but never unlocking the door. For investigators desperate to build a case, it was maddening. Every hour spent in that room yielded little more than ambiguity. The Carter family, informed of his cryptic statement, suffered renewed anguish. Emily's mother asked detectives again and again if it meant her daughter might still be alive. "Don't tell me there's a chance unless you're sure," she pleaded, her voice trembling on the phone. But no clarity was forthcoming. Turner's words had opened the wound wider, reminding everyone that closure remained elusive. Prosecutors tried to corner him by presenting circumstantial evidence. The glove, his sudden disappearance from town, the duffel bag found in his storage unit. Turner studied each piece carefully, then smirked faintly. "You think you know, but you don't," he whispered. His tone carried no fear, only disdain, as though the evidence meant nothing. Detectives left the room exhausted, their notes filled with question marks rather than answers. Behind closed doors, debates raged. Some argued his refusal to confess was proof of guilt. Others believed his words were manipulations designed to frustrate and misdirect. Without a body, without a direct admission, the case still leaned on inference rather than absolute fact. In the halls of the courthouse, whispers circulated that Turner was playing a long game, testing how far the state could stretch its case before something snapped. Meanwhile, journalists swarmed to cover the spectacle. Headlines fixated on his eerie remark, "Not where you think," and speculated about hidden burial sites, concealed hideouts, or even accomplices. Talk shows spun theories late into the night, transforming Turner into a figure of both horror and fascination. His refusal to clarify fueled endless speculation, and Bloomington, already tense, became a cauldron of fear and curiosity. Inside the jail, Turner maintained his pattern. He spoke sparingly to guards, spent long hours pacing his cell, and scribbled on scraps of paper that he later tore to shreds. Inmates who crossed paths with him described him as cold and detached, never joining conversation, never revealing emotion. One prisoner swore he heard Turner muttering to himself about water-keeping secrets, though no one could verify it. Prosecutors prepared for trial knowing they could not rely on a confession. Instead, they built their strategy around the psychology of his silence. "Juries hate riddles," one attorney explained. "They want answers. If he won't provide them, we have to show the jury he withholds the truth because he is guilty." Yet the risk remained. Without direct evidence of Emily's remains, defense lawyers could frame his words as meaningless posturing. For the Carters, the ordeal deepened their torment. Sitting in the back of the courtroom during pretrial hearings, they watched Turner's expressionless face and wondered if he was savoring their suffering. Each time he glanced toward them, Emily's father felt his stomach twist. "It's like he feeds off us waiting," he told a reporter. "Every pause, every silence. It's like he knows how to use it." Days stretched into weeks, and Turner's refusal to provide answers hardened into a strategy. What began as silence had become a fortress. He had no intention of breaking it. Investigators realized that if they wanted to move forward, they would need something beyond his words. They needed the earth itself to speak. When the mouth of a suspect refuses to give truth, where else can investigators search for the story that refuses to stay buried? Let us take you where the story turns shocking. A discovery in the woods. The summer of 2022 brought a breakthrough that no one had anticipated. For years, Lake Evergreen had been the focal point, its waters dragged and scanned, divers searching for signs of Emily Carter. But the answer did not lie beneath the rippling surface of the lake. Instead, it waited quietly in the thick woods 3 miles away, where hunters rarely wandered and sunlight struggled to pierce the canopy. A cadaver dog named Shadow, trained in advanced scent detection, was brought in during a renewed sweep of the region. The unit, using updated mapping software, identified parcels of land that had been overlooked in earlier searches. Shadow's handler noticed the animal suddenly veer toward a ravine, tail stiff, nose pressed low to the damp earth. Moments later, the dog barked sharply, pawing at a patch of soil disturbed long ago. Forensic teams worked carefully, shovels slicing into the ground while cameras recorded every motion. The air grew tense as layers of soil were lifted, revealing hints of cloth tangled in roots. At first, investigators hesitated, uncertain whether the find belonged to the right era. Then a fragment of a jacket emerged, navy blue in color, weathered but still distinct enough to recognize. It matched the description Emily's friends had given of what she wore the night she vanished. Within hours, skeletal remains were unearthed, each bone catalogued with painstaking care. Nearby lay personal items that time had failed to erase: a rusted hair clip, fragments of a wristwatch, and the remnants of shoes too degraded to identify by brand. For investigators hardened by years of grim discoveries, the scene carried unusual weight. They had not just found evidence, they had stumbled upon the long-lost resting place of a young woman whose absence had haunted an entire city. When the news reached Emily's parents, the silence on the phone line lasted nearly a full minute. Her mother finally whispered, "So she was there, all this time?" The family drove to the site the next morning, escorted by detectives. Standing behind yellow tape, they gazed at the excavation, tears flowing freely as they clutched one another. Though the discovery devastated them, it also brought a bittersweet relief. The limbo of uncertainty had ended. The bones were transported to the Illinois State Forensic Laboratory. Anthropologists began the meticulous process of analysis, measuring, photographing, and comparing records. Dental examinations provided the final confirmation: Emily Carter had been found. The official notice was delivered to her family in writing, yet no words on paper could capture the enormity of the moment. After 19 years, the Carters finally had an answer, but not the one they prayed for. Investigators combed the ravine for anything that might link Turner directly to the burial. They found more than they expected. Embedded in the soil near the remains was a rusted toolbox, corroded by weather but still intact. Inside were tools coated in grime, some etched faintly with initials. Though the marks were faded, specialists enhanced the etchings, revealing two letters: M.T. The discovery stunned the team. It was as if Turner had left behind a calling card, buried alongside the victim. Forensic specialists also noted unusual cuts on certain bones, suggesting forceful handling before burial. Though not enough to determine the exact cause of death, the markings indicated violence had been inflicted. The ravine itself seemed chosen deliberately, secluded, shielded by dense trees, and within walking distance of an old service road Turner had once worked on during a drainage project. It was no random location. It was a place familiar to him. The town of Bloomington responded with a surge of collective grief. Vigils reignited, this time with an air of solemn closure rather than desperate hope. Crowds gathered at the courthouse steps holding candles, their flickering light mirrored in tear-streaked faces. For a generation that had grown up with Emily's story as an unsolved riddle, the news struck like thunder. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery of vanishing. It was a confirmed act of brutality. Reporters flooded the region once again. Headlines shifted from speculation about Turner's cryptic words to undeniable fact. Emily's body had been found. Commentators described the discovery as the turning point, the moment a cold case transformed into a solvable crime. Turner, who had toyed with investigators during interrogation, now faced evidence that no denial could erase. For the Carter family, the discovery closed one door and opened another. "Now we know she's gone," her father said, voice hoarse at a press conference. "But we need to know why." That hunger for motive, for understanding what had driven Turner, became the next stage in their fight for justice. The woods had given back what they concealed for nearly 2 decades. Yet even as bones and belongings were carried from the ravine, one chilling truth remained. The earth had not revealed all its secrets. If the burial site exposed his presence, what hidden detail would finally prove his hand beyond any doubt? Let us tell you. The hidden evidence. The forest had kept its secret for years, until a partially buried toolbox emerged from the mud, rusted but unmistakably human in its story. Faint initials on the handle caught the forensic team's attention. MT, and under careful examination, they matched Turner. Inside, the tools whispered a chilling narrative. A hammer bore his DNA, smeared across the handle and flecked with traces of mud from the crime scene. A screwdriver showed faint blood residue, and gloves tucked into the box carried fibers consistent with Turner's clothing. Each object seemed almost deliberately left, a hidden signature of the crime. Even a notebook among the tools revealed disturbing premeditation. Scrawled sketches of Bloomington landmarks and repeated mentions of Emily painted a portrait of obsession. The authorities realized that what had seemed like ordinary items were, in fact, a blueprint of the killer's mind and movements. Detectives cross-referenced old sightings and neighbor reports. One had noted Turner hauling something bulky in the woods before Emily vanished. Alone, it seemed insignificant, but now it became a crucial puzzle piece. Every small, overlooked detail began forming a complete picture of what had really happened. Criminal psychologists weighed in, suggesting the etched initials were more than identification. They were a psychological imprint, a morbid desire to leave a mark on history. The toolbox represented both arrogance and guilt, a silent confession buried for decades. For the prosecution, the discovery was invaluable. Unlike prior circumstantial leads, this was tangible, undeniable evidence. Turner's presence at the scene could no longer be denied. The long shadow of uncertainty over Bloomington began to lift, replaced by a grim acknowledgement that justice, though delayed, was now within reach. The toolbox, once hidden, had spoken. Each tool, each mark, each fingerprint became a voice for Emily, finally telling a story that had waited decades to be heard. Could a simple, forgotten box hold the key that would unravel the full truth behind a murder that had haunted a town for so long? Could this rusted toolbox, silent for years, finally expose the secrets Turner tried to bury? Stay with us to know. The trial that divided a town. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the air heavy with anticipation and years of unanswered questions. Mark Turner, finally facing justice, sat stone-faced, a figure both familiar and feared to the town that had whispered about Emily's disappearance for decades. Families, journalists, and former neighbors filled the seats, each person carrying their own memories, their own pain, and their own hope for closure. The prosecution opened with a quiet, precise delivery, presenting the rusted toolbox first. They recounted its discovery in the woods, describing the DNA-laden hammer, blood-stained screwdriver, and Turner's etched initials. Each piece of evidence was meticulously photographed and laid before the jury. Every tool seemed to speak louder than words, a tangible link between Turner and the crime that had haunted Bloomington for years. Witnesses took the stand, their testimony slicing through the tension in the room. Turner's ex-girlfriend recounted moments of disturbing confessions and behaviors that, at the time, had seemed like eccentricities or exaggerations. Now, those same stories became pieces of a larger puzzle, adding depth to the physical evidence. Psychologists explained Turner's obsession with control and secrecy, providing insight into how he could commit such an act and bury it for so long. Turner's defense attempted to dismantle the narrative. They described the toolbox as coincidental, the DNA as potentially contaminated, and the notebook as unrelated scribbling. The courtroom buzzed as attorneys argued back and forth, each side painting a starkly different version of events. The defense claimed he was a scapegoat, a man haunted by suspicion more than proof. Yet as the trial progressed, even skeptics began to see the patterns emerge too clearly to ignore. Emotional testimony from Emily's family shook the courtroom. Her mother's voice, steady but tremulous, spoke of decades spent wondering, hoping, and fearing. Her father described nights filled with unanswered calls, the emptiness of a bedroom that remained frozen in time. The weight of their grief pressed against every word spoken, humanizing the statistics and legal arguments, reminding everyone that this trial was about more than evidence. It was about healing a broken community. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, their discussion intense yet surprisingly decisive. When they returned, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The foreperson spoke, guilty on all counts. The verdict unleashed a wave of emotion, relief, grief, and a sense of justice finally claimed. Turner's expression remained impassive, but the impact on those present was palpable, a collective exhale from a town that had carried Emily's absence for far too long. As the judge pronounced life imprisonment, reporters documented every detail while townspeople slowly exited the courthouse, some in tears, some in silent reflection. The trial had been more than a legal proceeding. It had reopened wounds, forced confrontations with painful truths, and reminded the community of the fragility of safety. Yet, it had also reaffirmed that truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way to the surface. Even after the trial reached its verdict, could true peace ever be found, or did shadows linger that no judgment could dispel? Stay close as the layers continue to peel back, revealing what happens after justice is finally served. After the verdict, the courtroom doors closed, but the echoes of the trial lingered long after. Bloomington was quieter now, yet a subtle tension remained. People walked the streets with a new awareness, glances exchanged as if acknowledging a shared trauma finally given a name. Justice had been served, but the town was still learning how to breathe again. Emily's family began to navigate life with answers they had long sought. Her mother spoke publicly for the first time, her words measured yet raw. "Knowing who did this doesn't bring Emily back," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "But at least now we can stop imagining who was responsible." That truth, as painful as it is, frees a small part of our hearts. The community listened, absorbing her honesty, feeling both the weight of loss and the relief of closure. In the weeks following the verdict, memorials and private gatherings became common. Friends and family of Emily would meet at Lake Evergreen, where a memorial bench had been placed. Flowers, letters, and small mementos appeared there regularly, each item a silent testament to a life cut short. Local artists painted murals in her honor, capturing moments of laughter and warmth that had been overshadowed by tragedy. The town was learning to remember her for more than the crime that had taken her. For law enforcement, the case remained a study in patience and perseverance. Detectives reflected on how a single piece of evidence, a rusted toolbox hidden for decades, had unraveled the entire mystery. The investigation had demonstrated that even the smallest, seemingly irrelevant detail could change the course of justice. For young officers in training, the Bloomington case became a touchstone, a lesson in observation, persistence, and the enduring importance of truth. At the same time, the community grappled with complex emotions. Relief for justice mingled with anger, sorrow, and disbelief that such darkness had existed so close to home. Town meetings discussed safety measures, neighborhood watches, and ways to prevent similar tragedies. Yet, amid these practical conversations, an unspoken acknowledgement lingered. Evil can hide in plain sight, and sometimes only time reveals the truth. Emily's classmates and friends began documenting memories, creating online tributes and video journals. Their aim was not only to honor her life, but to reclaim a narrative stolen by violence. Each story highlighted her humor, curiosity, and courage, turning collective grief into a form of preservation, ensuring her spirit endured beyond the headlines. Even behind bars, Turner maintained a dark presence. His rare letters, refusal to cooperate with authorities, and the infamy of his crime ensured he remained a subject of public attention. For Bloomington, his imprisonment was both a relief and a stark warning, proof that actions, no matter how long concealed, eventually demand reckoning. As the town began to rebuild, Emily's story transformed from a tragic headline into a shared memory, a lesson in resilience, and a reminder of the courage required to pursue truth. Yet beneath the surface, an uneasy question lingered. What other secrets might still be hiding, waiting for the moment to emerge? What fascinates you most about Emily Carter's case? The decades-long concealment of evidence, the chilling discovery of Turner's toolbox, the courtroom drama, the town's struggle to heal, the haunting personal stories, or the unsettling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight? Share your thoughts in the comments.